time for this week's edition of Rocky Talk here on RealAg Radio, brought to you every week at this time by Rocky Mountain Equipment, and you can connect with them online at rockymtn.com. Rocky Mountain is a longtime supporter of the Western Canadian Wheat Growers Association, and joining us now, we are pleased to have Cherilyn Jolly-Nagel of the Wheat Growers, Saskatchewan farmer, of course. For farmers that have heard of the wheat growers, Cherilyn, but maybe aren't familiar with what you guys are working on a day-to-day basis, what are the wheat growers about? What are some of the files, issues that you're working on right now?
Sure. The Western Canadian Wheat Growers Association is a farmer-driven policy advocacy organization. So we're advocating for the rules of agriculture. You can kind of look at policy. Farming is the sport, and policy are the rules around that sport. So we're in constant contact with government and other officials that make those rules. So it's a super fun thing for me. It's one of my passions is doing policy.
Especially when you make the sports analogy.
Right? And talking about those rules, and those rules are ever-changing. It's kind of a good combination between what society expects of us, what the economics are around agriculture, and what are the rules around that. So there's a lot of issues at play right now. Of course, for farming, rail transportation is always one of our top priorities when it comes to policy. Every farmer has experienced poor rail service, and it has been detrimental for each one of us. So from the beginning of time, since the wheat growers were first established 48 years ago, we have been working on rail transportation. So that continues to be an issue for us. The carbon tax is, of course, one of the most tumultuous debates that we have in Canada right now, and certainly in Western Canada. So the wheat growers are advocating, of course, for no carbon tax because of how detrimental that will be to our industry. One of the issues that I'm really passionate about these days is the issue around public trust, and how do we talk to consumers about all of the things going on in modern agriculture today. They have a lot of questions about how their food is grown, the equipment that we're using, the processing around that. So I'm making it my responsibility to go out and talk to consumers and answer the questions that they might have around some of that. And lots of other issues. Trade, everybody is talking right now about NAFTA and getting our wheat across that U.S.-Canada border. It's always been a huge buyer for us in the U.S., our biggest wheat buyer. So it's imperative that we have a NAFTA agreement and a CTPP agreement as well. So trade also remains to be a really big file for us.
Okay. That wheat trade between Canada and U.S., Cherilyn, is one of the issues that has been brought up by the U.S. in the NAFTA negotiations. Are the wheat growers in favor of tweaking Canada's regulatory system there when it comes to U.S. wheat coming north into Canada?
Yes, absolutely we are. There are severe grading discrepancies that need to be addressed. We consider it to be a nightmare if something like that happens. Very little grain comes from the U.S. up into Canada, and a lot of grain goes from Canada into the U.S. So it is in our best interest to make sure that those grading discrepancies get addressed. Right now, if a farmer in the U.S. sells wheat into Canada, it is automatically given a grade of feed wheat. So this is unacceptable. We have to address this. If this comes up as a bigger issue, it will drastically affect our sales to the U.S. So no question, we need to address that. And the wheat growers are working really closely with our U.S. counterparts, the grower groups, National Association of Wheat Growers. We're doing what we can to let them know we are fully on side, and any way that we can change that regulation, we are working towards.
Okay. You mentioned CPTPP. We, of course, saw House rise for summer without the legislation was introduced but not passed before the summer break. Sooner rather than later would be the best scenario there from a wheat grower's perspective?
Yeah, a real big disappointment that we lost track of time for that one. The wheat growers are advocates of free and open markets and competition, and 98% of what we grow in Western Canada and in Saskatchewan is exported. So we must take good care when it comes to these kinds of trade agreements, NAFTA and CPTPP. Whatever we can do to solidify those free trade agreements will absolutely be in the best interest of wheat growers.
What's next for the wheat growers in terms of on your plate in the coming months and issues that you have on your radar that you're going to be? You mentioned some of them that you have been working on. What's the priority for the rest of summer here, Cheryl?
Yeah, when it comes to policy work, I wish that we had like a to-do list where you actually cross something off the list and you don't have to go back to it. The biggest one, of course, the biggest win, I would say, for our organization was the Canadian Wheat Board no longer having a monopoly on our wheat and barley. So I consider that to be crossed off the to-do list. But for the most part, when it comes to transportation and trade and all of these issues, they will remain on our to-do list forever until we don't have any competition in the rail system. So I do not foresee that to not be an issue for us ever. We'll continue to fight for that. There's also, issues like the Canadian Grain Commission. They've been charging us overages for their menu of services for quite a long time. And I believe the last number I read was north of $150 million in overages. So that's an irritant. That keeps me up at night. I don't want to see that continue to happen. Those kinds of things have to be addressed. So there's really no shortage. Yeah. I guess for those of us that love policy, that's comforting to know there's always going to be something for us to argue about. And I don't foresee that changing anytime soon.
All right. And always something for us to talk about here on the radio. Yeah. Thanks for your time again, Cherilyn.
Yeah, my pleasure.
That's Cherilyn Jolly-Nagel, Director with the Western Canadian Wheat Growers Association. This has been Rocky Talk, brought to you by Rocky Mountain Equipment. We'll be back with RealAg Radio right after this.